$60 versus $600 piston rings. Don, is it worth it?
Gosh, Lake, that's a great question. The ring was actually invented back in the 1850s somewhere for a steam locomotive. This ring that you got there in your hand, this one here, that's fairly close to what they had back then.
Yeah, this is a big old 5/64th, 5/64th, 3/16th iron ring.
I've been around long enough that we used to use that ring in all the high performance stuff that we did back in the day because that's all we had. We didn't know at that particular time what we know now from all the testing that we've done.
Right, that the thinner rings made out of steel can be a lot better.
They can be a ton better.
The old days in NASCAR, this is what you used. Today, they use rings even thinner than what we're going to test in this engine and show you the result. Here's the deal. This 5/64th, 5/64th, 3/16th ring, it won't even fit in our modern pistons, right? So this is our 0.9 millimeter, 0.9 millimeter, 2 millimeter ring set that we're going to test against these, but we can't even fit these in this type of piston. So instead, we're going to use a 16th, 16th, 3/16th ring.
Very similar piston, but we were able to get that size of a ring to fit in the piston just for this test.
Essentially, that's the biggest piston ring.
It's the biggest ring that we could get in the piston.
Right, so let's get into some details before we fire the engine up, just so we leave, there's no questions about what we have. This is a regular old small block Chevy, flat tapped engine. Everything in it has already been broken in, ready to go. What's in there right now is a ductile moly 16th, 16th, 3/16th ring package. That's old school performance ring.
Old school performance ring, no gas ports, no nothing.
Right. No gas ports in the piston.
Right.
No gas ports in the ring.
Right.
Once we're done with this, we're going to do a 30-minute break-in. We're going to make 10 dyno runs. We're going to average the last 3, and that's going to be the power performance for this engine. We're also going to take used oil samples so we can measure the amount of wear that occurred.
That's correct.
From that. Then we're going to rebuild the engine, and we're going to put these pistons in, which are the exact same compression height. The top ring location is the exact same on these pistons in the engine and this one.
Yep.
The same compression as well. So we have the same compression on the pistons, both of them. Ring location is the same.
Weight of the piston's the same. Everything's the same except for the size of the ring.
So we're going to from a ductile moly ring to a steel ring with the new variable hardness coating.
Which we have tried before and had some very good success with.
And the gas ports.
Let me stop on the gas ports there. On our racing engines, our pistons are actually gas-ported pistons. We have horizontal gas ports in our pistons. We use that all the time.
Right.
When you started developing this gas-ported ring, which when we first heard about this, we're like, how in the hell do you do that? How are you doing it? How do you machine that and make it work? Right. We thought to ourselves, well, we've already got this piston with gas ports, so we're just going to put that gas-ported ring on the gas-ported piston. It worked incredibly well, Lake, as you know. It worked. We've got engines running out there still with that combination, with a tiny, tiny ring that's actually sealing up because of the gas ports in the ring and the piston. Now, this particular engine here, this piston here, there's no gas ports in the piston itself. Right. They're all in the ring itself.
Right, and that's the reason why it's a $600 ring set.
Yep.
Because it's a thinner steel ring, and that steel material is what allows it to be thin and still be durable and strong.
Without breaking.
Right.
And the other thing that's adding to that cost is some really cool engineerings on coating.
Yeah, the coatings and the gas ports add to that price tag.
Yeah.
But what we'll find out is, and answer the question, is it worth it? How much gain can you realize from going from that old school, proven we know it works, 5/64th ring, all the way now to our thin steel ring with the modern coatings and the gas ports? Let's go ahead and shut up. Let's fire this up and show you some results. Okay, that's 30 minutes. Time to shut it down and let it cool down because, woo, 318 degrees oil temperature. That's the hottest oil temperature I've ever seen during break-in with these 16th, 3/16th rings. So gotta shut it down and let it cool down, and then we'll make the power runs. A few years ago, the guys at Engine Masters, they did a dyno test, similar to what we're gonna do today and show you the results on. They ran a 5/64th ring versus a 1.2 millimeter ring. So that's basically going from a 2 millimeter ring to a 1.2 millimeter ring. And they saw about a 7-8 horsepower advantage going thinner like that.
Because of the fact that one of the highest friction parts in the engine comes from your piston ring.
Right.
From that ring rubbing on the cylinder.
Absolutely. Number one source of friction and wear in your internal combustion engine is the piston ring against the cylinder wall.
If there's something else that's wearing more, you got a problem with the engine.
Absolutely right. Okay, time to start making our power runs. We're gonna make 10 power runs, 3 minutes apart. Let's go ahead and make the first run. So one of the differences between our test and the Engine Masters test is I'm not sure what they did for honing. You see, with today's modern thinner steel rings, we found that a certain honing process, a plateau hone, like a real plateau hone, actually helps improve ring seal, which improves engine performance. We've talked about that a ton on this channel, so we'll leave a link in the description box below for all that, so we don't have to rehash all of that here. The point being is I don't know how they honed that block. It could have been the old school 400 grit finish. If so, that may have changed their results. What we did with this engine is we used a profilometer to measure the results. We did that plateau hone that we know works well for these thinner steel rings, which by the way, also works well for the thicker old school ductile moly rings. That's the nice part about the plateau hone technique, is it works for both old school type rings and the modern new school rings. It works great for both. That's what we have in this engine. The profilometer results show us that. So that may be one of the things that changes the results of our test compared to their test. So one other difference between the Engine Masters test and our test is when they went from that 5/64th ring, basically a 2 millimeter ring, down to that 1.2 millimeter ring, that's a change of 31 thousandths in ring size. We're going from a 16th ring to a 0.9 millimeter ring. That's only 27 thousandths change in size. So they had a little bit bigger change than we did. Again, we're not gonna know until we finish putting the engine back together with our nice handy dandy gas-ported 0.9 millimeter rings to see how much of a difference our test does compared to their test. Again, we mentioned it earlier, not only did we change the size, our change in size is less than theirs, but we're adding gas ports and we honed it for the modern steel rings. Let's see if adding the gas ports and changing the hone overcomes the lack of thickness change compared to the Engine Masters test. Ignition. Fire in the hole. Earlier we said this is a $60 versus $600 ring set test. Well, the reality is our $60 5/64th, 3/16th iron ring set, it wouldn't fit in a modern performance piston. So our ductile moly 16th, 3/16th rings that barely fit in a modern performance piston, they're actually $200. So it's really a $200 versus $600 ring set test. Okay, 30-minute break-in's done. Now it's time for the moment of truth. Do our power pulls, 1 every 3 minutes. Gonna make 10 of them, average those last 3, and then we'll see what the results are. We got oil pressure, ignition, fire in the hole. before we get to the power numbers, there's two things that we have to get to before we even address the horsepower numbers.
Yeah.
First one is the temperatures.
Is there a difference between oil temperature, everything else being the same, the only difference being the 16th ring, non-gas ported ring, versus the 0.9 gas ported ring?
Yep.
Was there a temperature difference between those two, Lee?
A little bit.
So we actually had less temperature, doing the exact same test the exact same way. We had less temperature with the 0.9 ring.
When we finished doing the run-in with the 16th ring, the oil temperature was right around 314, 315 degrees Fahrenheit.
It was pretty hot.
It was really hot.
This is at the same water temperature. Now, everything else being the same water flow, everything, that we kept the temperature stabilized at the same, and we had a lower oil temperature with the smaller ring.
Right, we did. Now, here's the thing, like you just mentioned, one of the key things is to do those 10 runs with the 16th ring, we had to have the cooling valve wide open.
Yeah, all the way open.
And we had to add
cool water to the system to maintain the water temperature.
Right.
So that it would be a fair test, apples to apples test.
Inversely, with the 0.9 millimeter ring, we had to close the valve.
Just a bit, yeah.
To maintain that 190 degree water temperature with the 16th ring, it made over 300 degrees oil temperature.
I think I saw 312, 313, something like that. That gets to a scary point right there.
Right. And we were only about 290, 280 something with the 0.9 millimeter ring.
I just couldn't believe it. When I came in and looked at your results, because you had everything written down, I'm like, did this really happen? But then again, I realized, well, of course it did, because I already knew at that point what the power numbers were.
Right. Now, for anyone who's wondering, right, so just for the skeptics out there, hear me out. Because I hear you saying already, well, it's that thin ring isn't transferring the heat. Wrong. And let me tell you why. If that temperature had been trapped in the piston, the oil temperature would have gone up. Because that oil is still splashing on the bottom of that piston every time.
Yep.
If that piston was hotter, the oil temperature would have gone up.
Yep.
And it didn't.
It did not. It went down.
Right.
It went down. Now, how do you explain that temperature, the oil temperature going down when the power goes up, Blake?
Friction. If you rub your hands together, your hands will get hot.
That's what we've been trying to say the whole time.
You rub your fingers like this together.
All about the friction, like it's all about the friction.
Absolutely.
And when you have, even though you've got that tiny, tiny ring with gas ports where the explosion is trying to push that ring against the cylinder wall, we had less friction.
Because it only seeing that increased load when you need it to see.
Exactly.
Everywhere else of the 720 degrees of rotation, you don't have that extra drag.
Exactly.
It's just ring jujitsu. So that's the real reason that we saw less wear as well. Because not only did we have lower temperatures because we had less friction, but also we mentioned this earlier about the hone. With the Engine Masters guys, right, we made a lot more power than they did. And we're going to get there in a minute. But we mentioned before that we honed this engine specifically for
this purpose.
This kind of ring.
Yes,
right?
This purpose. Is there a difference? For all the guys that are just starting out, there's a huge difference. There's many videos that you have on that.
Right, yeah, we won't even dig into that. But what we see that with that, we'll call it big ring, that higher tension
the fat ring,
there was a ton more wear. You could see it in the oil.
You could see it in the oil color.
Right.
You could you can't see the particles, you can't see it, but you can see it with the color of the oil, with the shade of the oil. You know that there's more contaminants in the oil. A lot of you guys, and Lake was fascinated about this when he first got here. We would drain an engine, we would drain this mill motor here, and we'd look in the pan, and it would look like oil was pearlescent.
Yeah.
What is that from, Lake?
That's metallic particles in the oil.
And it's normal. Every engine will have metallic particles in it. Every time you start it up, it will shed.
Now, just so everybody understands, everything in this engine, other than the rings, was already broken in.
Yep.
So don't think that, it's not a fair test. It's a completely fair test. The cam's been broken in. Everything's broken in. The only thing we were breaking in
Was the rings.
That was it. Break-in oil isn't about the name that's on the label. It's what's inside the bottle that matters. We're going to use the break-in oil from High Performance Lubricants. Not because it says it's break-in oil, it's because it is higher zinc, lower detergent, which is going to be perfect for breaking in this engine. Not only because it's a flat tappet camshaft engine, but that same balance of no friction modifiers, higher zinc, lower detergent is also excellent for ring break-in. And we even did a little flush before we even did the runs.
We always do that to make sure that we're getting an accurate result.
Yep, so any of the assembly debris is all out of the way.
Yeah.
So we flushed it, we ran it, and the key is this. When we measured the used oil, we saw a ton more iron from the ring, from the cylinder wall.
You know, we can actually do that here now, Lake, thanks to your fancy new tool.
And that used oil analysis confirmed that the 16th ring produced more wear than the 0.9 millimeter ring. Again, all this does is confirm what we've done before. We've run 1 millimeter rings in this engine before. We've run 0.7 millimeter rings in this engine before against the 16th rings. And when we did that before, guess what we saw? We saw those super high temperatures. In fact, when we ran the 16th ring the first time, we did that first durability test, it got so hot that the decal on the oil filter
peeled off.
Yeah, like a shrinky dink.
Now that's pretty hot on the oil.
It got hot, but we also saw that it had more wear in the used oil analysis compared to the thinner ring.
More heat is more friction. The friction is what generates the heat.
Right. So we know that temperature went down with the thinner ring. Wear went down with the thinner ring.
But at the same time, the thing that doesn't make sense for most folks is the power went up. So all those factors went down and this went up. What does that tell you? That gives you the numbers that we saw, which I had guessed a certain number, Lake. I really had guessed a certain
number. You'd have lost.
I'd have lost that.
I would have lost too.
Yeah, I think we both would have lost that bet. We didn't realize exactly how much it was worth doing this particular test.
You know, again, we've run these similar tests in the past, but not with this particular 0.9 millimeter ring with the variable hardness coating on that ring.
Right.
That combination of the 0.9 millimeter ring with the gas ports, with the variable hardness coating, the last 3 runs, average on both, 18 horsepower.
No! When you got that result, I was on my way home to Simi Valley, and you texted it to me. I almost crashed the damn car. I'm like I guessed 6 or 7 horsepower. I figured that was easy, because that's about what we got last time with the test we were doing. You were almost at 20 horsepower difference just between the difference in the 2 rings.
Yeah, when you did a oil temperature to oil temperature the same. Water temperature, water temperature, oil temperature, oil temperature the same. It was 20 horsepower.
20 horsepower.
But the thing is, we had to manipulate that to get that head-to-head. Because the thinner ring ran cooler, that 18 is the water temperature being the same.
Yeah.
But the oil temperature was lower with the 0.9 millimeter ring, which meant the oil was thicker, which is why the average of the last 3 runs is only 18. But the reality is, I mean, we went from a $200 ring set, went to a $600 ring set, but we gained essentially 18 to 20 horsepower.
How much is that worth to some of these guys?
I mean, think about it. That's $400 difference. You can buy a camshaft that'll give you about 20 horsepower for about $400, $500. So, but your camshaft can't lower the wear in your engine or lower your engine temperature.
Just a little thing, you know, we've been doing this particular type of test for a while now. We actually have tested something very similar in our sprint car motors, Lake.
Yes.
And, well, you've done 7,000 runs? Or
7,000 runs on this engine, on this dyno.
I don't know how many runs I've done in my tenure here at Shaver's,
I don't
but
want to count.
Quite a bit more than that. To be able to see a 7 or 8 horsepower difference after all the work we've done on our sprint car motors, to be able to see that difference with just the ring change, kind of blew me away too. We are now using this in our engines because we know it works. So is it worth paying the extra money? For us it is, yes.
Absolutely. Yes. And the reason why we saw a bigger number than the guys at Engine Masters did with their test is pretty simple.
You can't just say, I'm going to put this ring in and make it work.
So true, Don. So true. We have a system that's optimized for that.
Right.
For the gas ports, with the coating, with a thinner ring. The way we honed it, for that package, that piston, for that ring combination, is why we saw a bigger gain than they did. If they had actually added gas ports to their ring, if they had honed it differently, they may have seen a bigger difference than they saw. But being ring guys and dyno guys and having so much experience with this, we knew what the right package was for this.
And we've worked with some really, really smart folks.
Yes. You see me and him on the camera, but there's a cast of characters back in the background that help make this stuff possible. From all kinds of different companies. You know, from Ben Strader to Billy Godbold to Dr. Peter Lee.
Brad Lagman,
Mark Malberg. There's a lot of people that have contributed to help making this possible. So while these results may seem shocking and, you know, unbelievable, especially compared to what the guys at Engine Masters did, just realize what you said a minute ago is the key. We didn't just change a ring. We actually showed you what the benefit is of the complete package. When you use the modern ring technology, when you use the modern honing technology, the benefits are well worth the cost.